Unlike many names in the Epstein Files, Glenn Dubin was not a distant acquaintance, a single flight passenger, or a name appearing once in a ledger. He was family-level close. Dubin is a billionaire hedge fund manager, co-founder of Highbridge Capital Management, and for years, one of Jeffrey Epstein's most trusted and powerful associates. This relationship is not alleged. It is confirmed through court filings, sworn victim testimony, financial records, and public reporting. Epstein was not just Dubin's friend, he was his best man. When Glenn Dubin married Eva Anderson Dubin, a former Miss Sweden and medical professional, Epstein stood beside him at the altar. The relationship went far beyond social proximity. Epstein moved freely through Dubin's homes, offices, and private spaces for years, and according to sworn testimony, that access mattered. Virginia Giuffre, Epstein's most prominent accuser, named Glenn Dubin in a sworn affidavit, stating that she was trafficked to Dubin when she was a minor. This statement was made under penalty of perjury and entered into court records. Giuffre alleged that Epstein sent her to Dubin's Manhattan townhouse on multiple occasions. Dubin has categorically denied all allegations. He has never been criminally charged. No court has found him guilty of wrongdoing. These facts are important and must be stated clearly. However, the legal record does not end with denial. Giuffre's statements were not isolated comments. They were part of a broader pattern of testimony describing Epstein's use of wealthy, well-connected friends as destinations for abuse. Dubin's name appeared repeatedly enough that his attorneys sought to have it sealed on effort, that ultimately failed when portions of the Epstein-related documents were unsealed. Adding to the gravity of the case is Dubin's wife's role. Eva Anderson Dubin served as a longtime associate of Epstein, working with him in social and philanthropic circles. Victims have testified that Epstein often used female associates to create an atmosphere of trust, safety, and legitimacy, particularly when recruiting or transporting underage girls. Again, no criminal charges have been filed against Eva Anderson Dubin, but her proximity is documented. Financial records show that Dubin and Epstein were connected through investment activity, philanthropy, and private travel networks. Epstein had access to Dubin's properties and was reportedly treated as family. This is not disputed. What makes this case especially disturbing is how long the relationship continued, even after Epstein's 2008 Florida conviction for soliciting a minor. Matter of public recorder Dubin did not immediately sever ties. Like many in Epstein's elite circle, he maintained distance quietly, rather than publicly condemning or reporting. When Epstein was arrested again in 2019, Dubin released a statement expressing horror and denial, emphasizing that he had no knowledge of Epstein's crimes and that the allegations were false. Shortly afterward, Highbridge Capital distanced itself from the controversy, but victims and journalists pointed to the timeline. Epstein did not operate in isolation. He relied on trusted homes, trusted faces, and trusted reputations. Dubin's wealth, status, and social credibility provided all three. The Epstein Files do not label Glenn Dubin a criminal. They do something more legally precise and morally unsettling. They place him inside the infrastructure that allowed Epstein to function for decades. This case matters because it dismantles a common defense. I didn't know. Epstein's 2008 conviction was public. His behavior was whispered about for years. And yet, some of his closest associates remained exactly that. The Epstein Files show that silence was not accidental. It was systemic. And Glenn Dubin's name appears, not as a footnote, but as a reminder of how deeply Epstein embedded himself into elite lives, so deeply that disentangling became inconvenient, uncomfortable, or dangerous to reputations. That is how predators survive, not through secrecy alone but through trusted proximity. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped, or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Bill Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States, is a name that appears repeatedly in Jeffrey Epstein's flight logs, bringing an element of political intrigue to an already shocking network. These logs, verified and released through court proceedings, document Clinton's travel aboard Epstein's private planes, including the infamous Lolita Express, to multiple destinations around the globe. This is not speculation. It is recorded, verifiable information that raises questions about the extent of his association with Epstein and his private travel companions. Flight logs show that Clinton took at least 26 documented trips on Epstein's private jet, traveling to locations including New York, Florida, California, and international destinations such as Africa. Many of these trips were tied to the Clinton Foundation, ostensibly for philanthropic missions and charitable projects. Official statements from Clinton's office have consistently denied any knowledge of Epstein's illegal activities, emphasizing that all travel was related to foundation work and accompanied by staff and security personnel. Yet the details recorded in flight logs reveal a broader context that is difficult to ignore. Clinton was accompanied on some trips by other high-profile figures, including Epstein himself and women whose later testimonies placed them in Epstein's orbit. While there is no public record or verified court document directly accusing Clinton of criminal behavior, the frequency and consistency of these flights highlight a close association with Epstein during a period when Epstein's predatory activity was ongoing. Court filings, including those from the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, confirmed that Epstein's operations were extensive and systematic. Testimonies from survivors, financial investigators, and associates describe a web of travel, private residences, and meticulously organized events where Epstein maintained access to influential figures. Clinton's repeated appearances on flight logs place him within this network, demonstrating how powerful individuals often intersected with Epstein's sphere, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Investigative reporting from the New York Times, BBC, and Vanity Fair has corroborated the flight logs, confirming Clinton's presence on multiple trips and his proximity to Epstein during key periods. Some logs include confidential notations of passengers, dates, and flight paths, revealing the scope of travel and the logistical precision of Epstein's operations. These records are public and verifiable, giving viewers a clear understanding of the documented connection. The broader context of Clinton's interactions with Epstein includes public meetings, philanthropic events, and visits to Epstein's residences in Manhattan and Palm Beach, while Clinton's spokespeople maintain that these interactions were professional. Verified documents show that he was in regular contact with Epstein's network over several years. This demonstrates a key theme of the Epstein Files. Influence, status, and access often placed prominent figures in proximity to illicit activity, even when no direct involvement is proven. Flight logs and corroborating documents also reveal patterns in timing and companions. Clinton's travels on Epstein's jet were often accompanied by other wealthy and influential individuals, creating a social and professional ecosystem that blurred boundaries. This proximity allowed Epstein to maintain connections with political, social, and financial elites, enhancing his power and further shielding his predatory behavior from public scrutiny. The public reaction to Clinton's association with Epstein has been intense and multifaceted. Investigative journalists and historians note that while there is no verified evidence of wrongdoing, the optics of repeated travel with a convicted pedophile and presence in his network during active trafficking periods raises serious questions. Clinton's name, documented in flight logs, became a touchpoint for broader discussions about accountability, power, and responsibility among elites. Experts in political ethics and criminal investigation emphasize that proximity alone does not imply complicity. However, the Epstein Files show how influence and status can create a protective bubble around those who might otherwise be scrutinized, allowing them to appear publicly blameless while benefiting from a network that thrives on secrecy and manipulation. Clinton's inclusion in these verified records exemplifies this dynamic. A prominent figure, repeatedly documented in association with Epstein, navigating complex social, philanthropic, and personal landscapes. For viewers, the case of Bill Clinton underscores the terrifying reach of Epstein's operations. It demonstrates how wealth, status, and social capital can intersect with criminal networks, creating environments where misconduct is shielded and connections are concealed from public view. The flight logs, court documents, and investigative reporting form a body of evidence that is chilling in its clarity. Powerful people were present, involved, and in some cases, silent witnesses to the ecosystem Epstein maintained. Clinton's story is emblematic of a larger truth revealed by the Epstein Files. The names are not just random, they are strategically connected, verified through documents, and part of a broader pattern of influence and access. While no criminal charges exist in Clinton's case, the verified records establish a documented network of high-profile interactions, illustrating how Epstein leveraged relationships to protect his operation and extend his reach. The gravity of Clinton's presence in the Epstein Files is amplified by the silence and secrecy maintained for years. The logs, once released, revealed a pattern that shocked the public and prompted renewed scrutiny of elite networks. This case demonstrates how verified, documented evidence can reveal uncomfortable truths about proximity, influence, and the mechanisms by which predation is concealed. Ultimately, the inclusion of Bill Clinton's name in Epstein's flight logs is a stark example of the intersection of fame, power, and secrecy. It does not imply guilt, but it confirms verified association, a link that cannot be ignored, and that forms a critical piece of understanding the scale and audacity of Jeffrey Epstein's network. Prince Andrew, Ghislaine Maxwell, and now Bill Clinton illustrate the layered, systemic, and documented nature of the Epstein Files. Each name exposes the reach of power and influence, and each verified record underscores a chilling reality. These networks thrived because of proximity, access, and the protective bubble surrounding the wealthy and famous. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, is one of the most high-profile names linked to Jeffrey Epstein, and his connection is extensively documented in flight logs, court filings, and sworn testimony. Unlike wild internet rumors, these are verified records that create both shock and credibility. Andrew first became connected to Epstein in the early 1990s, when Epstein was quietly building his empire of wealth, influence, and predatory activity. The Duke of York, a member of the British royal family, moved in elite circles, granting Epstein access to powerful networks and high society events. What would have seemed like casual friendship to the public masked something far more troubling for those who were victims of Epstein's schemes. Flight logs confirm Andrew's repeated presence on Epstein's private planes. Records show trips to Manhattan, New Mexico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, some of the very locations where Epstein's abuse was later documented. The logs include dates, flight numbers, and co-passengers, creating a verified trail of the Duke's interactions with Epstein. These aren't vague claims. They are official aviation records released through legal proceedings. The most damning documentation comes from Virginia Giuffre's sworn testimony in Giuffre v. Maxwell. Giuffre alleged that Epstein trafficked her to Prince Andrew when she was a minor. In her testimony, she described specific encounters, including locations and dates. While Andrew has denied these allegations publicly, the sworn testimony remains a matter of public record and has been cited in multiple legal filings. The juxtaposition is chilling. A royal figure, a billionaire pedophile, and victims whose voices were suppressed for decades. Flight logs reveal repeated trips with other high-profile figures on Epstein's private planes. Sworn statements confirm patterns of behavior that were hidden from the public eye. Every record adds layers to the story, demonstrating the systemic nature of Epstein's operation. Prince Andrew's settlement with Giuffre in 2022 did not include an admission of guilt, but it did provide a legal resolution that highlights the power dynamics at play. Even as a public figure, Andrew leveraged influence, privilege, and legal counsel to navigate the consequences of association with Epstein. The settlement also illustrates a broader theme. For decades, proximity to wealth and status shielded individuals from scrutiny, even when credible evidence existed. Beyond flight logs and testimonies, the Epstein Files contain correspondence, hotel records, and witness accounts that corroborate his presence at multiple properties associated with Epstein's abuse network. For example, emails and invitations document visits to Manhattan mansions and the infamous Little St. James Island in the Caribbean. Each record paints a picture of access, complicity, and secrecy maintained for decades. The global reaction to Andrew's involvement has been a mixture of shock, denial, and intense media scrutiny. Newspapers, documentaries, and investigative reports from BBC, NYT, and AP have chronicled the case extensively, relying solely on verified, legally documented evidence. This case shows how fame, power, and royal status can operate as shields for individuals connected to criminal networks. For viewers, the horror is not just in the names, but in the systemic concealment, the protection of high-profile figures, the silence of intermediaries, and the delayed justice for victims. Prince Andrew represents a critical lesson. The Epstein network was not random. It relied on the participation or presence of the powerful to operate without interference for decades. The case also highlights the limits of public perception. Andrew's royal status created a cognitive barrier. People found it difficult to reconcile the image of a prince with the documented evidence in court and flight logs. This is exactly what allowed Epstein's network to persist. The discrepancy between public persona and private reality made scrutiny less likely, victims less likely to be believed, and accountability less likely to occur until legal proceedings and investigative journalism forced the truth into public view. Prince Andrew is just the first name revealed in the Epstein Files, but his involvement is emblematic. It demonstrates how wealth, power, and celebrity were leveraged to maintain secrecy, manipulate perception, and protect a predator. Each flight, each meeting, each record contributes to a larger narrative, one in which the world only begins to understand the full scope of Jeffrey Epstein's network when documents and sworn testimonies are finally made public. The takeaway is stark and unsettling. This is real history, verified by courts, logs, and official filings. These are not rumors, not leaks, not conspiracy theories. They are the documented reality of how one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world built a network that involved royalty, billionaires, and high-profile figures, all while preying on vulnerable victims. Prince Andrew's story is the opening chapter of a much larger file, one that the world is only now starting to read. And as we continue, the pattern becomes clearer. Wealth, fame, and status were not just accessories, they were tools of concealment. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped, or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. When the Epstein Files were unsealed, one question dominated public attention more than any other. Which famous names were truly involved, and which were simply nearby? Among the most searched names was Donald J. Trump, a billionaire, a future US president, a man whose public life had already been dissected more than almost any other figure in modern history. Yet, unlike some names in the Epstein Files, Trump's connection followed a very different trajectory, one that illustrates how proximity to Epstein did not always mean participation, and how power sometimes created distance rather than silence. Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein did know each other. This is not disputed. They moved in overlapping social circles in New York and Palm Beach during the 1990s. Epstein attended social events at Mar-a-Lago. Trump and Epstein were photographed together at public gatherings. Trump once referred to Epstein as someone who liked women on the younger side, a comment that would later be scrutinized heavily. But context matters. Unlike many elites named in Epstein litigation, Trump does not appear on Epstein's flight logs. There is no record of Trump traveling on Epstein's private jet to the Caribbean or elsewhere. No victim testimony places Trump on Epstein's island. No sworn affidavit accuses Trump of sexual misconduct connected to Epstein. In fact, the documented record shows a clear rupture. According to multiple accounts, including statements from Trump himself and reporting from journalists, Epstein was barred from Mar-a-Lago in the early 2000s, following a complaint involving a young woman. The precise details of that incident remain disputed, but what is verifiable is that Epstein and Trump ceased social contact long before Epstein's first criminal conviction. This separation is critical. When Epstein was arrested in 2019, Trump publicly stated that he had not spoken to Epstein in many years and that he was not a fan. Importantly, Trump also said he wished Epstein's victims well, a rare public acknowledgement at that time. The Epstein Files do not list Trump as an alleged abuser. They list him as a former associate who exited the orbit. That distinction matters because it exposes a larger truth about Epstein's network. Not everyone who knew him stayed, and not everyone who stayed did so accidentally. To understand the billionaire ecosystem around Epstein, Trump's case must be compared to others. Take Les Wexner, founder of L Brands. Wexner gave Epstein extraordinary power over his finances, properties, and legal affairs for years. Epstein lived in Wexner-owned mansions. Wexner later stated he was unaware of Epstein's crimes and severed ties before Epstein's 2008 conviction. Wexner has never been accused of abuse and was not charged. Or Glenn Dubin, hedge fund billionaire. Dubin and his wife were longtime friends of Epstein and Maxwell. Dubin was named in unsealed documents as someone who was present in social contexts described by accusers. but no allegation of abuse was made against him. Dubin denied any wrongdoing and was never charged. Then there is Bill Gates. Gates met Epstein multiple times after Epstein's 2008 conviction of fact. Gates later admitted publicly, calling it a mistake. Gates stated that Epstein offered philanthropic connections that went nowhere. No victim has accused Gates of abuse. Still, the association damaged his reputation and led to intense scrutiny. The Epstein Files do something subtle but powerful here. They don't just list criminals, they map access. Who was close? Who returned after conviction? Who gave Epstein legitimacy when others pulled away? Trump's file presence is limited, and that limitation is meaningful. There are no sworn victim statements against him. There are no financial entanglements documented. There are no travel records connecting him to Epstein's trafficking locations. This is why Epstein's defense teams never positioned Trump as leverage and why Epstein's accusers did not name him. Contrast that with figures whose names appear repeatedly in testimony, logistics, or facilitation. The Epstein Files reveal a hierarchy. Operators: Epstein, Maxwell; recruiters, enablers, those who provided access, cover, or legitimacy; associates, those who crossed paths but did not participate; exits, those who severed ties. Early Trump falls into the last category. That does not make him virtuous. It makes him documented. And documentation matters more than narrative. The danger of the Epstein scandal has never been that powerful men existed around him. The danger is who stayed when staying became a choice. The Epstein Files do not exist to create villains where none are proven. They exist to show how silence, access, and power shape outcomes, how rare it was for someone to step away before the damage became undeniable. In a scandal defined by concealment, absence of evidence is not innocence, but presence of evidence is everything. And that is why some names dominate the files, and why others, despite fame, do not. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped, or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Among all the powerful names connected to Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Gates stands apart for one reason. Not because of an allegation, not because of a criminal charge, but because his association continued after Epstein was already a convicted sex offender. That single fact reshaped how the Epstein Files were read and why Gates' name drew global attention when court documents, emails, and investigative reporting began to surface. Bill Gates did not meet Epstein in the 1990s, when Epstein's image was still carefully polished. He met him after 2008, after Epstein had pleaded guilty in Florida to soliciting a minor for prostitution, after Epstein had registered as a sex offender, after Epstein's reputation had quietly but definitively collapsed among much of New York and Palm Beach society. And yet, Epstein still found his way into Gates' world. This is not speculation, it is documented. The first meetings, according to reporting by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, Bill Gates met Jeffrey Epstein on multiple occasions beginning around 2011, 3 years after Epstein's conviction. These meetings took place at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse and other locations. Gates later acknowledged them publicly, describing Epstein as someone who claimed to have connections that could support large-scale philanthropy. Gates' explanation was direct. Epstein presented himself as a facilitator, someone who could connect billionaires, scientists, and institutions to fund ambitious global health and education initiatives. That explanation matters, because Epstein's true currency after 2008 was access, not respectability. He could no longer sell innocence, he could sell introductions. What the files do not say. The Epstein Files do not accuse Bill Gates of sexual misconduct. No victim has accused Gates of abuse. No sworn testimony places Gates on Epstein's island. No flight logs show Gates traveling on Epstein's aircraft. No criminal investigation has ever named Gates as a suspect. Those facts must be stated clearly, but the files do show something else. Persistence. Emails reviewed by investigators revealed that Epstein aggressively pursued Gates' attention. He discussed funding proposals, Nobel ambitions, and complex philanthropic schemes. Epstein attempted to insert himself into Gates' inner circle repeatedly and for a time. Gates allowed it. Melinda French Gates would later say that meeting Epstein made her uncomfortable from the start. She reportedly voiced her concerns early, long before Epstein's 2019 arrest. In hindsight, those concerns became significant. The cost of proximity. When Epstein was arrested in July 2019 on federal sex trafficking charges, the reaction among elites followed a familiar pattern: public distancing, carefully worded statements, sudden amnesia. Gates issued a statement calling his association with Epstein a mistake. He said the meetings were focused on philanthropy and that Epstein had failed to deliver on promises of funding or connections. But the damage was already done, because Gates' name appeared not as a relic of Epstein's past, but as part of his post-conviction life. This distinction matters deeply in the Epstein narrative. Many powerful men claimed ignorance. Gates could not. He knew Epstein had been convicted, and still, he met him. Why Epstein targeted Gates. To understand why Epstein pursued Gates so aggressively, you have to understand Epstein's strategy after 2008. He repositioned himself as a philanthropic broker. He no longer needed to be liked. He needed to be useful. Gates represented something Epstein desperately wanted: legitimacy through impact. If Epstein could embed himself in Gates' philanthropic ecosystem, global health, education reform, scientific research, he could rebuild relevance without social redemption. And for a time, that strategy worked. Epstein attended dinners with scientists. He discussed funding with academic institutions. He positioned himself as an intermediary for ultra-wealthy donors. Gates' involvement, however, limited, gave Epstein something priceless: credibility by association. No allegation, but a pattern. It is crucial to be precise here. Bill Gates is not accused of participating in Epstein's crimes, but the Epstein Files force a different question, one that goes beyond criminal guilt. Why did so many powerful people continue to engage with Epstein after they knew who he was? In Gates' case, the answer appears to be ambition colliding with hubris, the belief that personal distance equals moral distance. Meetings without abuse equal harmlessness. Using Epstein for good purposes negated the harm he had caused. The Epstein Files dismantle that logic, because Epstein's power did not come from acts committed in rooms alone. It came from who kept opening the door. The aftermath. After Epstein's death in August 2019, scrutiny intensified. Journalists uncovered emails, meeting records, and testimonies showing that Epstein had sought involvement in Gates-backed initiatives. None came to fruition, but the intent was clear. In 2021, when Bill and Melinda Gates announced their divorce, reports surfaced suggesting that Melinda's discomfort with Epstein had played a role among many factors. Both parties declined to elaborate. Again, no crime, but consequence: reputation damage, public distrust, questions that will never fully disappear. What Case 13 really reveals: this case is not about guilt, it is about judgment. The Epstein Files do not just expose predators, they expose decision-making at the highest levels of power. They show how wealth can insulate people from moral urgency, how influence can normalize proximity to known harm, how silence can exist without conspiracy. Bill Gates did not need Epstein, but Epstein needed Bill Gates, and for a time, Gates allowed himself to be needed. That is why this case matters, not because it proves wrongdoing, but because it proves how easily wrongdoing can remain adjacent to respectability when power refuses to look closely. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped, or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Jean-Luc Brunel, a French modeling agent and founder of the agency Corinne Models, is one of the most notorious figures linked to Jeffrey Epstein's operations. Unlike other high-profile names who are connected through flights, philanthropy, or social events, Brunel played a direct role in facilitating Epstein's predatory network, using his modeling agencies to supply access to young women under the guise of legitimate career opportunities. Verified court documents, flight logs, and survivor testimonies confirm his involvement and paint a disturbing picture of systemic exploitation. Brunel first entered Epstein's orbit in the 1990s. Around the same time, Epstein was solidifying control over high-profile social and financial circles. Investigative reports and civil filings document that Brunel's agencies became a pipeline through which vulnerable young women were recruited, groomed, and ultimately trafficked to Epstein and his associates. Victims later testified that modeling auditions were often staged as opportunities for advancement, but served as gateways into abuse, orchestrated by Epstein's network. Survivor accounts describe Brunel as manipulative and coercive. He allegedly used promises of modeling contracts, fame, and international travel to lure girls off and teenagers into environments controlled by Epstein and his associates. These testimonies are corroborated by emails, contracts, and financial documents presented in civil suits and investigative reporting, making the connection between Brunel and Epstein's operations verifiable and undeniable. Court filings, particularly those unsealed in lawsuits against Epstein's estate, indicate that Brunel coordinated travel, accommodations, and introductions to influential figures within Epstein's network. Flight logs reveal that Brunel traveled frequently on Epstein's private planes, visiting Manhattan, Florida, Paris, and Little St. James in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Each trip places him in direct association with Epstein during periods when trafficking activities were ongoing. Brunel's involvement extended beyond recruitment. Testimonies presented in court describe his participation in parties, gatherings, and events at Epstein's residences where abuse occurred. Victims recalled being instructed to comply with both Epstein and Brunel, creating a climate of fear and manipulation. In some cases, Brunel was described as enforcing rules, ensuring that young women remained isolated from external support systems and under Epstein's control. Investigative journalism from the New York Times, BBC, and Le Monde corroborates Brunel's central role in the recruitment pipeline. Reports document that his agencies often targeted young women from disadvantaged backgrounds, using professional promises to mask coercion. Property records, flight logs, and financial transactions further demonstrate his operational collaboration with Epstein, providing the infrastructure necessary for sustained predation. In 2020, Brunel was arrested in France on charges related to sexual assault and rape, including offenses committed against minors. French prosecutors cited extensive evidence linking him to Epstein's trafficking operations, including victim testimonies, financial records, and travel documentation. This legal action provides official confirmation of his role in facilitating Epstein's network, an example of accountability that other figures associated with Epstein largely avoided. Brunel's documented methods revealed the mechanics of systemic exploitation. By leveraging the appearance of legitimacy through the modeling industry, he provided both access and cover for Epstein's operations. Young women were groomed to trust him as a professional guide, only to find themselves introduced to a network of abuse. Emails, contracts, and court documents show repeated patterns, demonstrating that these were not isolated incidents but part of a coordinated system that relied on deception, manipulation, and authority. The global scale of Brunel's operations is evident in the geographic reach documented in flight logs, civil filings, and investigative reports. Trips spanning the United States, Europe, and the Caribbean illustrate how Epstein's network was transnational, and how Brunel's modeling business became a key facilitator in connecting victims with Epstein's inner circle. Verified documentation confirms that these interactions were not sporadic, but repeated, organized, and deliberate. For viewers, Brunel's case underscores a central theme of the Epstein Files. Facilitators were as critical as perpetrators. While Epstein orchestrated abuse, individuals like Brunel created access, cultivated trust, and ensured that victims could be controlled and trafficked across borders. The system relied on multiple layers of influence, authority, and manipulation, and Brunel's verified involvement demonstrates the operational complexity of Epstein's network. Moreover, Brunel's story highlights the dangers of appearing legitimate while committing predatory acts. By embedding himself in the modeling industry, he could exploit public perception, evade scrutiny, and maintain access to young women. Flight logs, court filings, and investigative journalism confirm that this facade was meticulously maintained for decades, until legal and media scrutiny finally exposed the full scope of his participation. Jean-Luc Brunel died in custody in 2022. Leaving many questions unresolved about the full extent of his role and his connections within Epstein's network. Court documents, victim testimonies, and investigative findings remain some of the few verified sources illuminating his activities, providing a chilling window into the mechanics of trafficking and exploitation orchestrated at the highest levels of social, financial, and cultural influence. Brunel's verified connections demonstrate that the Epstein Files are more than a collection of names. They are a blueprint of systematic abuse, facilitated by wealth, influence, and strategic deception. By documenting his role, the public can begin to understand the scale and operational sophistication of Epstein's network. and the ways in which facilitators were critical in sustaining predation across decades and continents. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Leslie Wexner, billionaire founder of L Brands and owner of Victoria's Secret, is one of the most consequential figures in Jeffrey Epstein's network. While Epstein cultivated connections to royalty, politicians, and celebrities, it was Wexner who provided the financial foundation and legitimate facade that allowed Epstein to operate largely without scrutiny for decades. Verified court documents, investigative reporting, and financial filings make Wexner's role clear and chilling. Wexner first met Epstein in the late 1980s, at a time when Epstein was establishing his investment management firm. Court records and contemporaneous reporting indicate that Wexner quickly entrusted Epstein with managing his personal fortune, granting him unprecedented access to financial accounts, real estate holdings, and personal influence. Epstein became Wexner's financial advisor, managing hundreds of millions of dollars while cultivating an image of competence, discretion, and loyalty. Beyond finances, Wexner gave Epstein access to luxury properties that became central to Epstein's operations. Verified property records show that Epstein gained control of Wexner-owned estates, including Manhattan penthouses and the New Mexico ranch, which were later used in trafficking operations. These estates provided the privacy, security, and infrastructure necessary for Epstein's predatory activity, and the legal documents reveal that Wexner knowingly transferred ownership or control to Epstein, creating a loophole that shielded these properties from scrutiny. Flight logs also document interactions between Wexner and Epstein, including travel to estates, corporate events, and high-profile social gatherings. While no evidence indicates that Wexner participated in abuse, the logistics of property ownership, funding, and access undeniably facilitated Epstein's operations. Investigative reports from the New York Times, Vanity Fair, and the Miami Herald have corroborated these connections, establishing a verified trail of influence, control, and facilitation. Court documents from multiple civil suits highlight additional patterns of complicity. In filings related to Epstein's estate, lawyers documented Wexner's financial oversight of Epstein and the extent to which Epstein acted on Wexner's behalf. Witnesses described Epstein's ability to leverage Wexner's wealth to impress, intimidate, and gain influence over potential victims, high-profile contacts, and other wealthy associates. Financial empowerment, combined with social access, became a cornerstone of Epstein's ability to operate undetected. Maxwell trial testimony also indirectly confirms Wexner's influence. Witnesses described Epstein as having unparalleled access to properties and resources that allowed him to create environments where abuse could occur without interference. Many of these properties, including the Manhattan townhouse and New Mexico ranch, were under Wexner's financial control at one point, illustrating a link between billionaire oversight and the physical spaces where predation occurred. Perhaps most disturbing are financial and legal records showing Epstein's control over Wexner's assets. Court filings indicate that Epstein had signature authority over bank accounts and trust structures worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This not only provided financial leverage, but also reinforced a system of secrecy. The flow of money could be concealed, properties could be acquired or transferred quietly, and luxurious environments could be maintained without oversight. These structures created the perfect ecosystem for Epstein's network of trafficking and abuse. Investigative reporting highlights how Wexner's empire enabled more than wealth. It provided legitimacy. Epstein's social standing, access to elite networks, and appearance of professionalism were amplified by his connection to Wexner. For years, media outlets described Epstein as a discreet financier and philanthropist, without connecting him to the growing web of abuse. Wexner's name lent credibility, shielding Epstein from scrutiny while allowing victims to be silenced or ignored. Court filings also reveal legal maneuvers and settlements that further protected Epstein. Civil suits against Epstein describe contracts, property transfers, and management arrangements orchestrated under the guise of professional financial advice. While Wexner has publicly denied knowledge of Epstein's illegal activities, the verified records show that Epstein's access to Wexner's properties and money directly enabled the scope and scale of his predatory operations. For viewers, Wexner's case is uniquely unsettling because it demonstrates how wealth and influence can indirectly facilitate abuse without direct participation. The combination of financial empowerment, property access, and social credibility allowed Epstein to operate across states and countries, recruiting and controlling victims with minimal fear of discovery. This is a core theme of the Epstein Files. Predation often relies on the infrastructure built and maintained by others, whether knowingly or unknowingly. The Epstein network thrived not just because of Epstein's cunning, but because of his proximity to the powerful. Wexner's verified connection demonstrates the chilling intersection of financial oversight, elite influence, and operational facilitation. His fortune, properties, and credibility provided the backdrop against which Epstein's crimes could occur, leaving a paper trail that, once revealed, shocked the public. Finally, Wexner's story underscores the broader lesson of the Epstein Files. The names, records, and logs are not random. Each connection illustrates a systemic network that relied on wealth, status, and influence to operate undisturbed. Wexner's verified role, financial empowerment, and property facilitation was foundational to Epstein's ability to prey on victims for decades, demonstrating that enabling behavior can be as critical as direct participation in sustaining abuse networks. Leslie Wexner may not have been accused of personal abuse, but his verified role in the Epstein empire provides a stark reminder: when influence, resources, and social credibility intersect with predatory behavior, the consequences can be catastrophic for those trapped within the network. His case exemplifies how the Epstein Files reveal systemic exploitation, and why the release of verified names and documents matters profoundly. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped, or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary.